He has spoken. Yes. The chaos agent that is Aaron Rodgers, Amal Shah, went on the Pat McAfee show today. So let's get this out of the way because, again, I don't think he's a malevolent dude. I don't think he's evil. He just takes up way too much of our time. Now, here's what happened. He went on the Pat McAfee show today and says he intends to play for the New York Jets. Rodgers said he made that decision on Friday. He's not holding up the trade. But the trade is being held up by the Packers wanting compensation back, obviously. However, it's done, and it would have been sociopathic behavior to have the organization go out and buy your groceries. Remember the want list we talked about yesterday with Alan Lazard, who you aptly pointed out got way more money than he should have from the Jets. He sends the Jets on a scavenger hunt, and then if he were to turn around today and retire or not want to go to the Jets, that would have been sociopathic behavior. However, it's closer to being actualized. That is, Amal Shah, Aaron Rodgers to the Jets.
Look, I have a huge affinity for Aaron Rodgers, the player, in terms of what he's been able to accomplish. I think if he wins a second Super Bowl in New York, he's going to be a top 5 quarterback, for me at least anyway. Maybe not everybody else sees it that way. There were some failures.
I agree with you.
Okay. Because I think some people might point to the shortcomings in Green Bay. But overall, his ability to not turn the football over has been immense. Going to a market like New York, Patrick, he'll get more criticism than he probably is used to, but he'll also get a lot more praise than he may have gotten in Green Bay as well, which is hard to believe. But I think it's a good fit. You know, you have Hackett, Nathaniel Hackett, who was the Denver head coach, who's the offensive coordinator now with the Jets. Alan Lazard is signed. You have the rookie of the year in Garrett Wilson. I mean, they have the building blocks. You've got a good running game in Breece Hall. To me, this is a good situation for Aaron Rodgers. I get your point in terms of age, but he's a guy, along with Brady and some of these other guys, the age factor for me hasn't been as much of a concern. And the way the game is officiated and the way quarterbacks are treated, it's not the same as it was 20 years ago. So I think you could sit back in the pocket and you could potentially pick apart defenses with his ability and talent that still is there.
And I'm glad you brought up Hackett. And, you know, this has been like a political election. Like, where's Steve Kornacki with the big board following every move from your boy A-Rod? Because he just likes the attention. I called him a chaos agent because he's just kind of one of those dudes that's hippy-dippy, yet a little passive-aggressive. I went through my feelings in that regard yesterday. I won't belabor it. But look, he is a 39-year-old quarterback. I think you're probably right. There's still a lot left in that tank. He's so talented, maybe the most talented we've seen at the position as far as arm talent. But he did show signs of regression last year, to be fair. Now, you brought up Hackett, and good job by you, because Rodgers today with McAfee confirmed that Hackett is the key reason he wants to head to the Jets. Quote, "There's one coach who means as much to me as any other coach I've ever had, and he is the coordinator there." He's talking about Nathaniel Hackett, who flamed out with the Broncos, by the way.
Absolutely. And, you know, to me, when you look at it, look, he mentioned how the affinity he has for Hackett. And I think having familiarity with somebody makes it so comfortable. You know, perfect example on this show, right? You've worked with Dustin in the past. I've gotten to know him. We're obviously trying to iron things out. Maybe if you can turn up the heat on the iron, it might get going a little faster. But the reality of it is you want to be in a situation where you're comfortable with the people you're working with and the people you're around. And it's the same thing, I think, for him. I want to actually pose a question to you because you lived in Los Angeles for a long time. You're friends with certain people that are in the celebrity spotlight. Do you think he is a product or a hostage of his situation? He's extremely wealthy. He's the most famous person in the state of Wisconsin. He's one of the most famous people in America. I think that there's a situation where he's the kind of guy. I remember Cristiano Ronaldo said this. Ronaldo can't go out to the store and just go do something, right? Like he just can't do it because he's so famous. Do you think some of this drama that gets created around Rodgers because yeah, we'd all want to be in that financial position, but do you really want to be that famous, I would ask? And do you feel like maybe he is held hostage by his own situation?
Before I get mischaracterized, I'd like to say I'm a hermit, an introvert, and I don't leave my apartment. Now, I will go on to say this. Hey, big guy, when we were doing the show, so it's a great question, Amal, because I was thinking about Rodgers and kind of what he brings. When we were doing our show on Mad Dog Sports Radio, Pat McAfee was on before us. So what's interesting here is we used to follow the conversation because he had Aaron Rodgers on at the end of his program, and we dealt with the trail leading up to the conversation with Rodgers, Amal, and then the wake after Rodgers would leave. And then we would come on, and people were just like, wait, we want more of that drama. And we're just the big guy and me trying to entertain and do the best we can. But we used to follow him, and it almost manipulated the channel in a weird way. The anticipatory nature that led up to Rodgers and the spot kept getting bigger. You remember, Dustin, it kept on getting bigger and bigger every single week. And then I mentioned the wake that he would leave behind. The wake was us. We had to follow that show, and it was a disaster. And I think that's what the Jets are getting. Follow me. I think that's exactly what they're getting. They're getting a guy that you aptly mentioned is coming in with probably a top 5 quarterback of all time. Absolutely, if he gets a second, I put him top 5. But they're getting a guy also that comes with a trail of drama that leads. And then whenever he leaves a room or has a press conference, there's a wake that he leaves behind that I don't know at 39 if the subject is worth the drama.
That's a fair argument. And my counterpoint to that would be is the talent is so immense. Think about this since, let's just say 2000. He's probably the 3rd most famous quarterback or player in the NFL in the last 2+ decades. Brady and Manning being 1, 2, depending on how you want to slice it. And then Mahomes, I would put at 4 right now. Just Mahomes hasn't been around as long. And the Green Bay Packers, whether people like it or not, they're a franchise on the level of the Dallas Cowboys, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Chicago Bears, the New York Giants. They are a long-standing franchise, a pillar of the National Football League. So I think you're always going to have attention when you're in Green Bay. To me, it seems like there was comments made about Matt LaFleur that you probably wouldn't want made if you're Matt LaFleur, if you're the team. I think there are a lot of guys on the team seem to still have an affinity for him. You see the relationship with Randall Cobb, some of the other guys. I forgot who was the player that had his phone. He's got a great relationship with guys. He does the spot there with Pat McAfee because him and A.J. Hawk were super close when they were with the Packers. I just think that for a 2-year window, in my opinion, the risk is worth the reward because otherwise you're looking at a bunch of guys. Can you really overcome the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen if you've got a pedestrian to slightly better than that quarterback? And I think Rodgers comes in and with a running game doesn't have to put as much pressure on himself to be successful.
Yeah, I'm using the personality as a counter, but I think you're right. I think the talent's still there. I think the regression had a lot more to do with his talent around him last year. By the way, Aaron Rodgers continuing with the passivity. When asked about compensation and how does Aaron Rodgers feel about it, he said, directed at the Packers, quote, "You've got an aging face of the franchise that it's time to do right by," he says. So he's taking a shot. That's one of the other angles here. And Dustin, when we're done with this, I want you, if there's any NFL news, and also Amal brought up a great point yesterday via text. We've got 16 games of the round of 64 tomorrow. We're going to hit as many as we possibly can, but we had to start with the drama. We've got a bunch of guests coming up, so if you don't mind, Dustin, in a minute, I'm going to come to you. I want you to lay out the guests. In between those guests, we're going to hit all these games. But just quickly, doesn't Aaron Rodgers leave the Packers with less leverage by playing his cards, showing his hand here, and walking onto the Pat McAfee show and saying, "That's where I want to play. Now get a deal done for me"?
I agree with what you just said there. He diminishes his leverage, but I also don't think the Green Bay Packers owe him anything. He has been compensated, and very handsomely, I might add, for the better part of almost a decade and a half plus. One of the things is I understand that theoretically we want players to be able to go out on a high note and, for a player to be able to have a Derek Jeter type of career and retire with the Yankees or someone like that, kind of go off with one team. But the reality of it is this is a business just like anything else. And at the end of the day, it's a bottom line. I always find it funny in corporate America. People are sitting there like, hey, it's too bad Bob is going to be let go. You know what? You're never going to talk to Bob again as soon as he gets his walking papers, okay?
Shut the Bob.
And all I'm saying is that in reality, the train just keeps moving down the track. The Packers will continue to move on. We'll see what Jordan Love is. Aaron Rodgers won't be forgotten. But let's think about this. Rodgers became so good. And it's not that people have forgotten for in Green Bay and the surrounding areas in Wisconsin, but the conversation about him has been muted for 15 to 20 years. And I totally agree. No, and you know what? I'm sorry to interrupt you. No, you're good.
But he actually went on and on. I effing love that city. I love that organization. And always going to have love for the organization. The facts are right now, they want to move on, and so do I. He called leaving Green Bay, Amal, bittersweet. So obviously he's got love for that organization and that city. It's a very unique situation in all of sport. It's very English Premier League-ish how Green Bay is set up, as you know.
That's a great analogy for people that are unfamiliar. The Green Bay Packers are the only team out of the 32 in the National Football League that are owned by the city. If you look in the Premier League, these teams are so entrenched within their local markets. In the NFL, you have always the threat in some of the smaller markets of the teams moving. To me, the people in Green Bay, the state of Wisconsin, have been incredibly loyal, not only to Aaron Rodgers, but to the Packers as well. I mean, let's be real here for a second. Nobody wants to call this out, but you go back to the early 90s when Brett Favre got there. For 3 decades, this team won 2 Super Bowls. I always equate it to the same thing that Tony Dungy doesn't get criticism for. Dungy's a great guy. But let me tell you, he won 1 Super Bowl with Peyton Manning, Edgerrin James, Marvin Harrison, and Reggie Wayne. That's
Fair.
criminal. That he should be charged criminally with failure. And to me, the fact that Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl is a failure on his part, along with the organization. He's gotten paid well. Look, it's time. At some point in time, if you have a divorce and you start criticizing the other spouse, at some point you got to start to move on. And this is a great point. The drama is going to continue almost up until the draft, or at least some more of these individual workouts, and then we can move on from this. As soon as he gets to New York, we can put this all to bed.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.